Welcome. This is Michael Chan of the Faith and Firearms Project, and I'm sitting here with a young student who's visiting us from a local university. And so why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a junior, 21 years old at a university in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
I have my conceal and carry right now, and I am studying IT management.
Yeah, so that you just mentioned your concealed carry permit. So that's one of the reasons why we're talking, because, I guess, how did you hear about this project? It was through your campus pastor, or?
Correct. I actually came on a tour of the seminary.
That's what it was.
Yeah, I came on a tour of the seminary, and while I was here, I had no idea that I was going to even encounter the project. I even actually thought I was kind of alone in the world of Christian firearms, at least in terms of conceal and carry. But I just kind of came across it, and then I had heard yourself speak and briefly mention that you had this project, and that piqued my interest. And
what was interesting to you about it? Was it just the fact? Yeah, just what was interesting?
Yeah, I think the part that was most interesting to me about just hearing the project was, I think it touched on a lot of the kind of inner questions I had been asking myself and kind of working through in my life. Just all related to how being a firearm owner and a conceal and carry holder, how that kind of intersected with my faith, and kind of trying to figure out how to best be a Christian in my own mind while still doing what to many would seem like something that's very at odds with the faith itself.
So would you say that right now you're still asking some of those questions?
Oh yeah, I think that we're always asking those questions, and I think anybody who tells you they have it all figured out is deceiving themselves, or they just haven't actually asked the right questions. I'm always trying to figure out my religion itself, as well as how it ties into just being a firearm owner, and I think that it's just a journey that we're always on, because every new circumstance and situation and just experience in life is going to change a little bit of the way that we did think, and might bring some new perspective into our lives.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's start talking. Let's talk a little bit about your faith, which you just mentioned. There's no right and wrong answer to this, so just just answer with whatever's true to you. What does it mean for you to be a Christian?
For me in particular, it means, well, it changed as I was growing up. For me, originally, it just meant what it does to a lot of people, just trying to live every day the best you can, and then showing up for church as often as you can manage. But as I went into college, I kind of started questioning if that was really what living out my faith meant, and what it's almost turned into and become has been more of, for me, I've delved into the Bible, and I've tried to really figure out what Jesus has been telling us to do through the apostles and through all of the writings. And the more I've looked into that, and the more I've researched and just deepened my own spiritual life, it really kind of comes down to just living life, even though as difficult as it is in our society now, living as close to the what the Bible is telling us to do.
Yeah. Can you say something about how your religious upbringing?
Yeah, sure.
And maybe in the denominations you had encounters with, or how you would describe the Christianity you were involved with?
Totally.
Yeah.
I grew up in a very Lutheran family, very Protestant. I always loved going to church. It was fun. I did drift away for a little while, as I'm sure every high schooler or just young kid does, because it's kind of boring at times. But I grew up in a very Lutheran family, and throughout my time, kind of towards the end of high school and into college, when I started doing that digging into my faith, I started really questioning what it was in my heart to be a Christian almost. And I started questioning everything that I was brought up believing, because personally I don't think that you can really know yourself, or there's no real growth or understanding if you don't ask yourself those tough questions. And it almost felt dishonest to me to not ask those questions, because that would be just kind of being complacent in my faith and just believing rather than like going out and finding it for myself. So that journey kind of led me to the Catholic Church for a little while, as well as
In high
other
school? Was this in high
denominations.
school? that
This
you were
was in
attending?
college.
In
that
college,
that
you were
started.
attending a Catholic church.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I still was at Lutheran Church, but I also attended Catholic Mass just because I think it gave me a lot of the tradition, and I'd say just the stability that the Protestant Church at many times lacks in some aspects. However, I'm still on a journey right now as to developing my faith and figuring out exactly what it is, but I think
Yeah.
I'm pretty Protestant, so. Yeah.
So when you think about God, again, this is another really open-ended question. When you think about God in your own mind, what are some of the images that come to mind?
Well, first and foremost, and I know it's not as popular of a position nowadays, but he just a father figure, at least to me. I think that whenever I imagine God, or whenever I'm praying and talking to God, I always just imagine as if, when you're little, you're kind of sitting on the bed with your dad right there next to you, or your mom, or whoever, like a parent. But for me, it's like sitting next to the Father. And then it's just a very intimate conversation between one another, and I think that really that is the only vision that comes to me when I think of God, is just maybe not in human form, definitely not in human form, but like just a father.
Yeah, thank you. So let's get into guns.
Okay.
Let's get into the topic of guns. Talk to me about your history with firearms.
So, it started young. I grew up in it wasn't necessarily like a major gun household, but my grandfather hunted, and we always, growing up, we had a cabin in the woods, so we'd always go and like shoot pop cans or squirrels or other things. And I mean, it wasn't a big part of our lives, but it was always there. It was always present. And I also grew up really close to like law enforcement. Like we were very close to those people in our community, and
because was it a small community, and so you were able to have a lot of contact with them?
It was. I grew up in the suburbs, but my grandfather's and grandmother's place was out in the country on a lake. I think my family was very into the community, so I just like interacted with those people a lot. It wasn't necessarily a small town. It was just those interactions took place.
It was a priority for your family to be involved in the community.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
That's kind of shifted a little. I mean, they're still very involved, but it's shifted. They've gotten busier and things have happened, but that was kind of my upbringing. So I was never uncomfortable meeting new people, and having grown up around guns my whole life, they just never really, I mean, you hear all the bad news, but having seen the other side too, it never really frightened me, or,
Do you remember what your first encounter with a gun was?
Oh gosh. Well,
maybe hard to think that far.
Yeah, back. I think my first encounter was definitely at my grandparents' house. They had a very big gun case, very ornamental, very ornate, in one of their rooms where my grandfather stored his firearms. A lot of them antiques. He probably never fired them a day in his life, but excuse me. I always just that was also the room where like the guest bed was, so I would sleep in there, and I'd see them and stuff. But my first encounter actually shooting a firearm, if it even counts, was probably a BB gun. As a kid growing up, I got it when I was, oh gosh, must have been like 10 or 11.
Okay.
And then, yeah, my first time shooting an actual firearm was probably somewhere near around 15, 16.
Mm-hmm. So in high school.
Probably in high school.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you have a concealed carry permit. So
correct.
Tell me about the decision-making process. Kind of what led up to your making that decision to go through that? Because here in Minnesota, it requires, a class. You had to take a class, right? And then you had to fill out some forms.
Correct.
Some legal forms. So what brought you to take that step?
Well, so the way that I kind of went through it was I first applied for my permit to purchase when before I was 21, and then when I was 21, I could actually pick up the firearm. And then I went through a class. I had to demonstrate my proficiency in the firearm itself, and then I had to go back and I had to register with the county then again for another background check, and then that took about a month before they were done and satisfied, and then my permit came in the mail. But can you remind me what your original question was?
Oh, no, that's fine. What was the kind of the decision-making process? Yeah, the motivation. We can put it in those terms, yeah.
You know, it felt like the right thing to do to me almost. I think that I kind of live in a culture right now, not just, even in my family was very hesitant for me getting a conceal and carry, at least my immediate family, and I also think that just the culture and everywhere we've been, or everywhere in Minnesota, is very iffy depending on the people you talk to about firearms in general. So it was a very, I wouldn't even say big decision because I just made it really quickly, but it's one that I didn't take lightly. I thought a lot about it, and it always, like growing up, I always knew I was going to conceal and carry.
Oh, even when you were younger?
Yeah, there was always, to me, an appeal to not have a firearm. It wasn't about having a firearm or having that, but I always in my heart I knew that if I ever got into a situation where I would need it, or where my life or someone else I cared about or just another person was threatened, I wanted to be able to act and have a capacity to like try to save that life, even if it's not my duty in society or, you know, my job. I want to be able to be there for somebody else, just like I would hope if I were unarmed and in that situation someone would be there to help me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Let's see. So, as you think about guns in general, what do they represent to you? What do they symbolize? That's another way of putting it.
To me, it symbolizes safety, a sense of like calmness and security. Yeah. I think honestly, that's probably
what comes to mind.
Yeah.
Safety and security. I'm trying to think if I can ask. I can always edit this stuff out. I'm trying to think if I can ask a follow-up question that might be helpful. Well, actually, I think now's probably a good time to kind of dive into the religion stuff.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so here I'll ask the question. I'm just going to leave a little pause for the sake of editing. It's easier if there are like these pauses so I can kind of play with it. Let's transition now to the topic of religion and guns, and really the heart of this project. Do you see, in your own thinking, how is your faith connected to your ownership of firearms?
See, that's a question I've been grappling with for a long time, because I feel like it's my duty to, just as the Bible says, to help the poor, lift up the downtrodden. It's just everybody in society. It really almost connects with my faith in that I'm there to protect and just be there for my brothers and sisters in Christ. It's not really much more than that. I just there is evil in the world, and there are people out there trying to do bad things, and I pray that I never have to, but I want to be there, just as I was saying before. I want to be there to help my neighbor and help those people when they're in their hour of greatest need. I want to be almost like, I want to perform like the actions of Christ, or I want to be God's hand in the world at that point, just protecting those who need His help.
You mentioned the neighbor just a couple times in that comment, and what would you say if we had somebody in here who might look critically on the comments that you just made and say, well, wait a second, doesn't the Christian faith, it calls for us to love the neighbor, but how can you love your neighbor when you're willing to harm somebody with a firearm? How would you respond to that?
I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I think that honestly, and if you ask a lot of gun owners, they'll probably tell you the same, especially those who are Christian, that I will take every single opportunity I can to diffuse a situation without the use of force. I will do everything I can. I would even sacrifice my own life for somebody else to make sure that if I could save everybody else's life and sacrifice my own, I would do that. I would put forth every opportunity to end the situation peacefully, but I think at that moment where you know there's lethal intent in someone else's heart against yourself or just anybody else as part of God's creation, just any of your brothers and sisters, I think that at that moment it's no longer about loving every single one of your neighbors, even though you love the person that you are about to shoot. I think it more so becomes about taking, I don't know exactly how I want to say this, but it almost becomes more about not eliminating a threat, but just protecting those who are the most vulnerable. When you're in a position of power with a firearm, the people that you care for first and foremost are those who are most vulnerable, and if somebody is taking a path of violence, then even though you love that person, I think that deep down it's more about protecting those who cannot protect themselves rather than, because I mean at some point being human and being flawed, we have to make a choice. We'd like to, but we can't be perfect all the time, so.
Yeah, some of those comments connected with some earlier comments you made about when I asked about how you imagine God.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked about, if I remember correctly, a God who is sort of working on behalf of those who are vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
I think you made some kind of... would you say that is a strong connection for you in terms of your own theology, that by protecting those who are weak, you're somehow doing the will of God in that moment? Not quite sure if that question comes out correctly.
I totally think so. I think being vulnerable in this world, whether it's by our own choice or circumstances out of our control, is one of the greatest expressions of faith, because it puts us in a position that on earth we're powerless against everybody else if we're in a position that's vulnerable, and it's through our faith in the Lord, or at least if you're Christian, through your faith in the Lord, that He works through others who have power in order to raise you back up, or to help you to know that even though you are vulnerable, like, you're not alone. He's still there.
What do you think people who don't kind of sympathize with your lifestyle, what do you think they might misunderstand about you?
I think they think at heart I'm a very probably violent person, or that I have some need for power, or I'm an anarchist even, maybe, I don't know. I think that there's a lot of perceptions that I don't even want to attribute it all to the media, but just that a fear of those with the capacity to do harm, even if it's the best person in the world, if they have the capacity to do harm, it makes you fear for your own safety. And I think that just a lot of people don't understand that a lot of, I would even go out on a limb and say all conceal and carry holders, for the most part, they're not bad people looking to do harm. I'd say a lot of them are in the same position I am, where they're people that you would never even know in society would have a firearm. They just are kind of like the silent watchmen. They're there to be ready they're there and ready in a situation that would call upon them. I don't know if that fully answered the question, but
that's just fine. That like I said, in this case, there are no
right
or wrong answers. Yeah, it's your own reflections. We're near the end of the interview. Is there anything that we didn't cover in this time that you feel like you want to get out there, that you want to make a statement about? And feel free to take a moment to think about that.
I would just say that for anybody listening, or for anybody who thinks that, just for anybody with questions, or that thinks that they know the people who conceal and carry, I wouldn't jump to the conclusion that we we all have a violent nature, and I wouldn't even jump to the conclusion that we would all be ready to kill. I think that's a question that I honestly grapple with every time that I put on my firearm is, if something happened today, would I actually be able to pull the trigger? And it's one question that I really don't know the answer to. I say a little prayer that God will give me the strength to act in a situation that calls me to act, and to restrain in a situation that'll call me to restraint. And I really think that even though we have the ability to protect, some people, a lot of people would probably, when the situation comes, not, they until that situation, they wouldn't really know what they're going to do in that situation, or they wouldn't know how they would act. I think that, I'm getting my own thoughts kind of in circles now, but yeah, I would just say don't make assumptions about those people, and I guarantee you a lot of people that you really know and respect in society, and the people that you may even be closest with, it'll shock you who is actually concealing carrying in society, because we always think it's the stereotypical, like, redneck, gun rights, just activist people, but it's the cashier down the street, or the school principal who disobeys the own school laws because he knows that if the opportunity arises, he wants to be able to protect the kids in the school, or, it's those everyday people that just really want to be there for everybody else.
Well, thank you for this conversation. I appreciate your willingness to talk with me and share your thoughts.
Not a problem. I'm glad I could talk.
Good.